I'm sorry, I call the April 17, 2023 Planning Commission order at 6 p.m. Madam Clerk, will you please do a roll call?
Commissioner Rubio,
Here.
Commissioner Allen,
Here.
Commissioner Fernandez,
Here.
Commissioner Kendig,
Here.
Commissioner Scoggin,
Here.
Commissioner Cohn,
Here. Commissioner Scoggin.
Commissioner Glenn.
Here.
Cohen.
All commissioners are present. We have a quorum.
Glenn. All commissioners are present. We have a quorum.
If you're on the phone at the moment, could you please mute your microphone? We're getting a little bit of feedback in the chambers. Thank you.
Okay. We do have a quorum, so approval of agenda. Any additions or changes to the agenda? Any objection to approving the agenda as written? Hearing, seeing none, agenda is approved. Pledge of allegiance. Caleb, would you lead us in the pledge? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, that moves us to consent agenda. We have the minutes of the regular meeting minutes of April 3rd, 2023, and introduction for public hearing quasi judicial matters, resolution 2309, a conditional use permit in accordance with msb 1770, a regulation of alcohol beverage use for an alcoholic beverage dispensary bar known as Fairview Inn, located at 13625 East Main Street. Tax ID number 57000, block 12, lot 20-1, located within the township 26 North, range 5 West, section 24, Short Meridian. Public hearing May 1st, 2023. Applicant Hans Axelson for Fairview Inn, and the staff will be Rick Benedict, Planner 2. And for introduction for public hearing legislative matters, we have none. Any objection to approving the consent agenda as written? Hearing and seeing none, consent agenda is approved. We have committee reports. Agency staff reports. Metropolitan Planning Organization, Kim Solian.
Well, thank you, members of the Planning Commission. I am Kim Solian. I work for the planning department here at the borough, and you've seen me give some of this presentation before. One of my main projects I'm working on is helping stand up a metropolitan planning organization for the Mat-Su borough. So at the Joint Planning Commission assembly meeting back in March, the assembly asked that we bring forward to the Planning Commission more information about some of the projects that we're working on. And so you all get a first pass at some of the information before it floats over to them to take action on some of the decision points that we need to make. So I'm going to give an overview of the MPO. Please feel free, if you have a question about something I said as I'm presenting, flag it. I can pause and we can talk about certain things and keep moving. So I have about 15 slides to share, and then we'll transition over to Garrett, because really the focus of tonight and the MPO presentation is on the boundary development process and the draft metropolitan planning area boundary and the data that we use to come up with this draft boundary. But go back to why are we forming an MPO and when did this happen and what are the rules related to it? So since we have been waiting since the 2020 census to be certified, because we anticipated that the census would designate the Mat-Su borough as having an urbanized area. And Garrett will talk in more detail about the definition of the urbanized area and how they came up with it. But on December 29th, we got notice from the census that the census had designated an area in the Mat-Su as urbanized. And then mid-January, they sent a follow-up map so we could know what area they decided met that 50,000 people in a contiguous area threshold to call our portion of our community urbanized. So one of the things that happens when an area is designated as urbanized is that they have to form a metropolitan planning organization within 1 year of census designation. So once that designation happened on the 29th of December, that's when the clock started. And so that's why you're going to see a lot more information over the next 6 or 7 months about the MPO and MPO formation and the Assembly taking action on some of our formation documents. So many of you have probably seen this map. So this is the map that the census released as our urbanized area. I just wanted to highlight that for a reference. And again, Garrett will go into detail about the definition of the urbanized area and dwelling units and population. So a metropolitan planning organization is a federally funded planning and policy-making organization that's made up of representatives of the regional governments in a local community within that containing that whole urbanized area. And so MPO is really responsible for developing long-range plans for where we think transportation infrastructure should go based on our area of our community that is experiencing the most population growth and having the highest needs for services. There are about 460 MPOs across the country. We all follow the same federal regulations in terms of like the structure of our organization and our formation process. Though they all do structure their organization a little bit differently, that the federal government isn't like specific on how the organization needs to be formed. And I'll talk more about that later. The other main thing about an MPO is that not only does the MPO plan for where this infrastructure needs to go or should go to support that populated area, it's used as a tool to program federal funding. So it's really a way to put federal funding in the hands of local communities to decide where those dollars should go to support that transportation infrastructure. So we have the City of Palmer, City of Wasilla, the Matsu Borough, the state, and Chickaloon and Kinnick tribal governments within our urbanized area. And so these are the local organizations that we've been working with, local governments that we've been working with really since 2021 on the formation process. As we were getting ready for the designation, we started meeting as a body, as a steering committee. And then in 2022 in September, we formed a policy board made up of representatives from all the different organizations that have the decision-making authority of their organization. So as we drafted documents, we floated them to the policy board. The steering committee is mostly made up of staff at like the planning level, and the pre-policy board is like for us, Assemblymember Young is on the pre-policy board, Mayor DeVries and Manager Brown. And so similarly for the cities and tribes, they have representatives on our policy board at that authority level. So like I said, the MPO is really a planning organization, and there are 4 main plans that the MPO has to create to figure out how to plan and program that federal funding that will come to us on an annual basis. So the first plan we'll have to create is a metropolitan transportation plan, which is like, the borough has a long-range transportation plan, the state has a state long-range transportation plan. So it's a plan that has a 20-year horizon, and it looks at where all the infrastructure needs within that 20-year horizon in terms of where development is happening and where we think it's going to happen. So once we put this long-range plan together, and we update that plan every 5 years. So we're staying current on where population is going and make changes to it. Then every year we're programming projects into a TIP, a transportation improvement program. The borough is going through its TIP 23 process right now, programming where all these new roads are going to be. The MPO will also be working through that process. One thing I want to flag for you is that the borough will also be doing its own planning for its own infrastructure needs. The MPO will be doing planning, which the borough is a part of that. But the MPO won't serve like all of the borough's planning functions. It's just going to be in charge of the MPO boundaried area, and then a limited amount of funding. So the borough will still have to continue to plan for where else it wants infrastructure. But every year we'll update the transportation improvement plan because every year we'll get annual funding to support those projects. We also put together a really detailed work plan every 2 years that outlines how we're going to spend those federal dollars in terms of the staff and the organization and any of the plan updates that we're going to do. And then we'll also support different advisory committees. So we'll have the technical committee, we might have a bike and pedestrian committee, we might have a public transit committee. You all heard me talk about at the Joint Planning Commission Assembly meeting about the changes that are happening to the way our public transit providers receive federal funding in the urbanized area. So Valley Transit, for instance, will no longer be eligible to receive the funding that they currently get through this from the feds through the state. And another local entity, another government agency will have to receive formula funds to then program it to providers, transit providers in that urbanized area. So we also may program in our work plan some planning projects related to public transit. And then the last plan that we need to create and update is a public involvement plan. So like I said before, the reason MPOs were created is really to put the planning function and the federal dollars into the hands of the local community. And with that, the federal government is really clear that they want the MPO to make sure that it talks to the whole community about all the projects that it's programming to make sure that is really what the community wants as well. Or if we missed something and we're not noticing a need that a particular area of our community has, there'll be a robust opportunity for the public to weigh in about all of the projects that we program. So right now, how federal funding for transportation infrastructure comes to the Mat-Su Borough is that it flows to the state of Alaska, and the state of Alaska decides what its priorities are, and they spend that money wherever they like. But now, once our MPO is formed, we'll have the opportunity to program a set amount of that funds. The state won't be able to do that on their own. We'll have some say. The MPO will have some say. So annually, we'll get an allocation of planning funds from the federal government that will come through the state as a reimbursable grant of about somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 a year. So that will fund the organization to hire staff, to do the plans, to support the committees. And then annually, once the staff is hired and the organization is formed and we complete all of the plans that we need to complete, the MTP and the TIP, we'll have access to roughly $10 million a year to come to spend on projects that the MPO has outlined that they want to have done. And so there will be a match requirement both to the planning funds and to the transportation infrastructure funds. So the planning funds will need to be matched at 9.03%. So the borough, the cities, the tribes, and the DOT every year will put about $40,000 or $50,000 in to support the match for the planning funds, to match that $500,000 or so in planning funds. And then based on the projects that get programmed into the transportation improvement program, the facility, if it's a borough road that is being identified for, let's say, next year's funding, then the borough would have to come up with that 9% match portion. So if the feds are going to pay $1, we'll have to pay 10 cents or so on that project. And so the borough will have to do some work on figuring out how we're going to come up with those match funds. Since we don't have road powers, we will need to look to our road service areas to support the match and maybe create some other funding mechanisms. The state will also, if it's a state project, I don't know, they will have to pay match, but it's a different percentage. And then again, the cities and the tribes, if it's one of their projects, will have to pay that match as well. The only other thing I will share about that is that the MPO will not need to hire engineering and construction staff to manage all these new projects. So the DOT has agreed to handle all of our large procurements because we'll have to build the roads and advertise the contracts to federal procurement standards. And so the state will take care of that process, and then the state will plan and manage the contract for those roads. So the MPO won't do that either. So how is an MPO formed? So, we get the designation of an urbanized area. We have 1 year to form an MPO. And then we have to pull all these documents together. And then it's actually the governor of Alaska who will form the MPO. So right now, some of the work that we're doing and have been doing for the past 6 months is putting together our operating agreement, our bylaws, our organizational structure. You'll hear more about the boundary development process, our policy board and technical committee makeup documents, and then getting resolutions of support from the different organizations who will be part of the MPO. So this whole package with all those documents is called the operating agreement. And once we've finalized it, it will go to the governor's office. They'll take a couple months, hopefully not longer than that, to review the document and say, we agree, Matt Valley Planning for Transportation, you are now the new MPO for Mat-Su. We agree with your boundary, we agree with your bylaws, we agree with the operating agreement and how you said you're going to run your organization, and now you are create yourself. So once that happens, well, I guess I'll go to the next slide. Once the package goes to the governor's office with resolutions from the assembly and the cities and the tribes saying they support the work we've done, we've finalized the operating agreement, we've finalized the bylaws, and we have a final draft metropolitan planning area boundary, that whole package will go together to the governor's office. And we hope to send that in May. And then over the summer, we'll be working on all the other behind the scenes formation documents for MVP. One of the things we'll be working on is we have to create an MOA between the cities and the state and the borough and the tribes that outlines how the match is going to be paid for and what the membership fee and annual dues are going to be for all of the organizations. So we'll have to finalize an MOA with all the cities, with the and the state and us for how we're going to pay for those dues. We'll also have to draft our nonprofit corporation paperwork. Some MPOs across the country are housed within another local government, but as we were going through the process, the cities said that they didn't have capacity to house the MPO, and the borough believed that we didn't have the capacity or the authority to house this other entity within our organization. And so the only other option was for us to form a nonprofit. So we'll be working on drafting those nonprofit corporation documents over the summer. And everything hopefully will get all buttoned up by October 1st, because we're trying to be ready to be able to receive that federal funding when the federal fiscal year turns over on the 1st of October. We might not make that deadline, but that's definitely our goal right now. So once the formation documents are submitted and the governor agrees with the structure of the organization, and we get the green light to file our nonprofit paperwork, and everything gets approved through the state, we will then hire an executive director, we'll look for office space, and start formally hosting our policy board and technical committee meetings, getting ready to work on some of these foundational documents that I talked about before. That would make it, hopefully by next year, we'd be ready to start receiving some of those capital funds from the federal government to support our infrastructure needs. Like I said before, one of the first decision points that are not first, but one of the major decision points we'll need from the assembly next month is a resolution of support for our operating agreement, our boundary, and our bylaws. And so all of those documents are still in draft form. They're not completely finalized yet, but as soon as the documents are finalized, we will get on the assembly's agenda and bring a draft resolution forward highlighting that the assembly does support MVP for transportation becoming the MPO for the Mat-Su, that they support us becoming a nonprofit organization, that they authorize Mat-Su Borough representatives to serve on the policy board, and that they support the boundary that we've proposed. So hopefully, yeah, that all the timeline works like we hope it will, and we'll be before the assembly with that resolution and the package. And with that, I did want to highlight, we have a website. It has all of our past meeting documents on it, all of the recordings from all of our committee meetings. You have some documents before you. I left a map and a frequently asked questions document as a handout for you. Those are all on the website. It also has some of the federal requirements and the guides that we're following, but I just wanted to let you know that we do have one. It's mvpmpo.com, pretty easy. And it also has our interactive map that Garrett will talk about in a second related to our boundary development process. And then, yeah, I guess I got through all my slides. You didn't have any questions while I was talking. So do you have any questions before we move on to Garrett's presentation? On the back of the little blue handout is my email and contact information. If you do have any questions that come up, please feel free to reach out. We also host our steering committee and policy board meetings once a month. You're also welcome to call in and listen in on those if you want to be more involved. Yeah, I would encourage you to do that. Okay. We'll move on to Garrett.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening, commissioners, and everyone, all the members of the public who chose to join us on a very sunny evening. Thank you very much for your time and for inviting us here to talk. My name is Garrett Verbeek. I'm a planner for the Matsu Borough, working under Kim and under Alex. And we're here today to talk about the area in which this MPO is going to be operational and what the minimum requirements for that are to determine the boundary and the work that we've done to go into that. So really briefly, as Kim has mentioned, an MPO is an agency that is created by federal law, and its purpose is to provide local elected officials input into the planning and implementation of federal transportation funds to metropolitan areas with populations of greater than 50,000. So as Kim has said, this program, the purpose of it is to move decision-making power over roughly $10 million in funding per year from federal and state level decision makers towards local government. And there is quite a bit of skepticism attached with the idea that this is a federal mandate in the community. We've been paying attention to community concerns, obviously, but in general, we believe that it should generally be appealing to the community, the idea that decision-making power is moving from the federal government towards the local government. So keeping that in mind, that $10 million per year can only be spent within a defined area. And we're here tonight to talk about how that area has been determined. So this is a jam-packed statement, but the statute definition is, at a minimum, the MPA, which is the Metropolitan Planning Area, which is the area in which the MPO operates, shall encompass the entire existing urbanized area, plus the contiguous area expected to become urbanized within a 20-year forecast period. And that's, again, jam-packed. So we're going to touch on what the implications of at a minimum are. We're going to touch on the existing urbanized area, and we're going to touch on what contiguous means and this idea of what is expected to become urbanized within a 20-year forecast period. So rolling back for a second, this at a minimum, we have to start with the existing urbanized area. And that's what you're seeing before you. You've seen this map plenty of times, I'd imagine. This was the urbanized area as released by the 2020 census on December 29th of 2022. And essentially what this is a contiguous area that was identified in the 2020 census. And as we'll see in a second, it operates on the assumption of anything with kind of continuous neighborhoods of 3.2 acres per house or denser is considered urbanized, which again is that's a little bit unexpected for many people. This idea of a 3.2 acre property is urbanized according to the federal government. The other surprise and skepticism that we've heard here is, as we can see, this boundary is a little bit patchwork, a little bit, there are hops and jumps involved, and it's not all contiguous in the sense that many of us think about it. And we've heard a lot of skepticism from the public that, oh, the federal government is trying to, they're bending the rules and reaching out to, combine certain areas and doing what they can to define this as an urbanized area. So to diffuse some of that skepticism, this was indeed created by the Census Bureau. It follows the exact same process across the entire United States. And if we consider the fact that the goal of this process is to identify emerging urbanized areas, right? It's to identify stuff as it comes out so that local governments can begin proactively making decisions. And it's also designed to work with a census, which is a process that only occurs every 10 years. So kind of the expectation is, if this is meant to identify emerging areas, then the very first time that any of these pop up, we would kind of expect it to be a little bit patchwork and a little bit barely there, because the goal is to identify the emerging area before it becomes too late to do anything and too late to start making effective decisions. So essentially this was released in 2023, in December 29th of 2022. And we get exactly 1 year from then to form an MPO, to send it to Juneau to collect public input. And that's the process that we're in now. So if we consider that this minimum boundary for an MPA, it needs to be larger than that urbanized area. And it needs to look forward 20 years and attempt to predict where that urbanized area boundary will be in 20 years. So what are kind of the ingredients that we need to do that? We need some idea of what the total population is going to be in 20 years. We need an idea of where those people are expected to live. And we also need to understand when the Census Bureau talks about contiguous, the contiguous is not exactly touching, but there are some hops and some jumps involved. So again, feel free, like this presentation has been really designed for the public and for people without any planning experience. You're obviously a little bit more, have some more expertise through virtue of your experience. So if there are any questions, please feel free to interrupt at any time. But the total population forecast that we're working towards is a Department of Labor forecast from 2019, which suggests that between 2020 and 2045, an additional 46,000 people are expected to come into the Mat-Su borough. That's quite a few. And of those people, so it's 46,000 for the entire borough. If we look at our historical trends, that translates to roughly 43,000 of those people expected to live in between, like maybe call it Houston and Sutton, with the remainder in Talkeetna, Lake Louise, that type of thing. So we're planning for trying to figure out where 43,000 new people might live over the next 20 years. And then assuming what the spatial distribution of them will be, as I mentioned, the definition of urbanized that the federal government operates on is a concept of 200 households per square mile. And to most of us, that doesn't mean anything. That's not how we think about land, but that essentially translates into 3.2 acres per household. So there are some causes of increased density, which we'll get into in a second. You can either increase density by actually building new buildings, or the fundamental geometry of all of this is by census block. So there are also scenarios where if you redraw the boundaries for census blocks without any new construction, if you kind of draw circles around the denser neighborhoods that are watered down into, suppose, a large area around Lazy Mountain, for instance, then there are also scenarios where without building anything new, you can suddenly create new areas that are urbanized. And then finally, contiguous, we have to keep in mind these hops and these jumps. So essentially, as we saw, bouncing back really quick, we have some, that's not going to show up. Fair enough. We're seeing the little patchwork. We're seeing the little gaps in between some of these polygons, and those are your half-mile hops and jumps down road corridors. So that's another thing that we kind of have to keep in mind as we're looking forward. Under which circumstances could we start kind of doing this checkerboard type movement into denser neighborhoods? But those are the three things that we're trying to keep in mind for drawing this MPO boundary that's based on the urbanized area in 2020 plus a 20-year forecast. So for some visuals really quick, again, really trying to drive home this idea that what most of us think of as urbanized is not what the federal government thinks of as urbanized. So on the left of this slide, we have a, just taken off of Zillow. I apologize if any of you people know this property, but this is a beautiful 3-acre property down on the Kenai Peninsula. As you can see, it has multi-car garage, outbuildings, main building. That's not what most of us think of as urbanized, but driving home the fact that if we have continuous neighborhoods of these properties, that will get swept into this minimum MPA boundary. And then finally, here's another illustration on the right of the concept that without any new construction, it is feasible that 10 years from now, you could have new urbanized areas. Because the way that urbanization is measured, this 200 households per square mile, is measured on the basis of census blocks. And every new census, the Census Bureau redraws the blocks. So as we can see on this map, what we've done is this is looking down the Old Glen Highway just across the bridge, getting towards the Buttes. The blue lines are your census block polygons, and the ones which are shaded orange there in the bottom are census blocks which were identified. They hit that 200 household per square mile threshold in the 2020 census. And as we can see, though, those are not the densest neighborhoods on the map. The one that's circled in red is the densest thing on the map, but as you can see, it's included in a way larger census block, which is something like 25 square miles extending out towards Lazy Mountain. And because it's averaged into that largest census block, the overall density of the census block is not considered urbanized. But there is potential in the next 10 years that when the Census Bureau comes back for the 2030 census, all they have to do is draw a little line around that neighborhood, and without any new construction, that's urbanized. So that's another thing we have to keep in mind for this forecast. So how do you forecast where 43,000 people might live over the course of the next 20 years? Turns out that is really hard. We have multiple people and agencies have tried to do that for different planning projects over the course of, I think since the Matsu Borough was incorporated. They've always been wrong. We're going to be wrong. We know that. But essentially, the options that we had to start with were an AMATS forecast, which is the Transportation Planning Board associated with the municipality of Anchorage. They had done that in 2013. And we started working with that, but quickly identified that the actual building activity that we saw between 2013 and 2022 had deviated quite a bit from their forecast. That was kind of, that forecast was created under circumstances where people were very confident in development of Port Mackenzie, where people were very confident in development of the Kinnickarn Bridge. So it predicted a whole bunch of growth towards Kinnick and towards Port Mackenzie that never materialized. And it predicted far less growth than we actually saw up towards Palmer and Westella Fishhook, and kind of in other not remote areas, but in other peripheral areas towards the north and the east. So we kind of went back to the drawing board there and we said, okay, we can't use this 2013 forecast. How could we go about working on where 43,000 people might live in the next 20 years? And the basis of this forecast rests on the idea that any new houses in the Matsu Borough in the next 20 years are likely to be built on currently privately owned land, which does not have a building on it. That's kind of the basic assumption. So this idea that if we're going to build a new house, it's probably going to be on land that's currently privately owned and it doesn't have a building. Because there's plenty of land, as we all know, in the borough that's owned by the state, it's owned by the feds, mental health trust, tribes, you name it. But that generally takes a little bit more than 20 years to be earmarked for sale and then sold and then bought and subdivided and constructed and resold and settled. That's kind of a little bit longer of a time horizon than we think we'll see in 20 years. So if we assume that all new houses are going to be built on this currently privately owned unbuilt land, we can divide those into a couple different categories. And the first category we identified is, okay, and what is privately owned, unbuilt, and what's a small, less than 5 acre parcel? So this is all the stuff that's in existing subdivisions. It's been in private hands. It's ready to go. It could be bought tomorrow and built on all the lots that are kind of ready to go. And this is a quick overview of how many total parcels there are in the area. There's an assumption that, okay, not all of it's going to be built residential, but generally you see 20 residential lots developed per 1 commercial lot. And kind of an assumption, just as a quick gut check, how many people we could fit on it. We can fit up to 32,000 people on this land if all of it was built out. But probably not all of it is going to be built out. The second category, so we have all the stuff that is privately owned, unbuilt, small, ready to go. That's likely to be built in the next 20 years. Another category that's likely to see activity in the next 20 years is what is currently undergoing platting actions in the borough, right? So these are the larger parcels, the 20, 40 acres that are currently getting platting actions to be subdivided. And that to us indicates, okay, the owners of that land have some plan for it. Right now, they're currently trying to get it through platting to do something with it. And therefore, 20 years from now, that's also fairly likely to become residential. And we backed out some stuff. This kind of reflects what the state of affairs was in December of 2022. Here, we did not assume that only one building would go on each of those parcels. We'd assume something to the effect of it would turn into roughly 1 acre parcels. Made some other assumptions, backed out areas like GPRA, which was currently undergoing a planning action, but we know that's not going to be residential. And we get another bucket, which could fit also a substantial number of people. And then the third bucket is everything else. And there is a bunch of land. So this is all stuff which is privately owned. It doesn't have a building on it, but it's not small. And there's no indication right now that anyone's trying to do anything with it. But it's still presumably available for construction at some point in the future. And guys, there's a lot of room. There's room for far more people than we're predicting, which is good news. But then we try to come up with how to distribute people across that land. And like we mentioned, we looked at a whole bunch of forecasts for where people might live over the past, and we realized every single one of them has been wrong. So we decided to cheat a little bit, and we said, okay, we're not going to make one forecast, we're going to make multiple forecasts. So what we started doing with those categories of land and that one forecast of 43,000 additional people is we said, okay, what if we have a scenario where everyone is drawn towards the existing small unbuilt parcels? They want to settle in with the neighborhoods that already exist. No one's interested in the new subdivisions. No one's going to develop any more land. What if we put as many people on that land as possible, and then we'll say 20% are going to go towards the new subdivisions, and the rest are going to be in large unbuilt stuff? What does that look like? And then we say, no. Okay, forget that. What happens if no one wants to live in the infill neighborhoods? What if everyone's drawn to the hot new subdivisions? What does that look like? And you start crafting these different distributions for how people might settle across those different categories of land, and then you stack them on top of each other. And that's what develops this map that you see in front of you. And the idea is that as you stack these different scenarios on top of each other, the darker the area, the more likely it is under any single one of those scenarios to hit the density threshold in 20 years. So that gives us confidence, even though we're not saying this is how it's going to be, we're saying that certain areas are more likely than others to be at that urbanized density within 20 years, assuming that we do have our 43,000 people, right? So if we're over that or under that, that could change the picture. We are assuming kind of business as usual in terms of people tending to settle on 1 acre single family residential parcels. But with those assumptions, this is what that distribution looks like. So we had, again, to reiterate, we'd selected our population forecast from the Department of Labor in 2019. We adjusted that borough-wide forecast of 46,000 people down to 43,000 people just to kind of match the area of interest. We weren't considering people who might move to Talkeetna or to Lake Louise. We distributed those based on the geometries of both census blocks and also that Anchorage municipality AMATS forecast. And we stacked all these different forecasts and came up with this map and drew a rough boundary around it. This was in December of 2022, before we had received the urbanized area. And when we received that, this urbanized area in orange is the same one that you've seen in purple. It was what was released by the Census Bureau. And we said, aha, we're on the right track. In general, the boundary that we drew around it matches with what is currently urbanized, which is a good sign. But again, it's not quite apples to apples because our boundary has to include a forecast 20 years from now. We can, in this case, see the hops and the jumps. Particularly, I'm sure all of you guys have noticed this little island up around Schrock Road, which really throws everyone for a loop. That little orange patch up in the top center, that is exactly 1.5 miles down the road. A little bit of a surprise. It fits, again, the Census Bureau rules. There are no conspiracies here, but fair enough. That's in there. So with that in mind, we thought, okay, we're on the right track. And then we went and very carefully, neighborhood by neighborhood, stepped around the boundary. And what we're looking for are instances where redrawing the census blocks could define an area as urbanized. We're basically looking for differentiations between neighborhoods where the houses are more than 3.2 acres or less than 3.2 acres. Because if you keep in mind that 200 houses per square mile is 3.2 acres per house, if you have a neighborhood where the parcels are 3.2 acres or more, that can never fit the definition of urbanized. That turns into a buffer that it will never fit those federal criteria. So we, again, in doing this, we considered the hops, we considered the jumps, we considered parcel sizes, and we also considered kind of logical boundaries based on streets and natural features. Because again, sort of census blocks are drawn on really kind of odd boundaries that will like go straight down the middle of a road. They'll cut across the road in the middle. And we're keeping in mind that this funding is meant to provide transportation projects. So if you can include an entire street, like to the end of a cul-de-sac, that kind of makes sense because ultimately what we want our MPO to be able to do is just say, okay, is a street in or out of the boundary? Like, so if you're trying to spend $10 million on a particular road and you have to keep in mind that, you know, the first 532 feet of that road are inside the boundary and the next 400 are outside of it, that's inconvenient. So we're trying to keep in mind the administrative realities and the convenience of trying to have sort of logical boundaries in that sense. And we came up with this draft minimum MPA. So the minimum is really convenient because it depends on those mathematical definitions which are set up by the Census Bureau. But there's also reason to go beyond the minimum, which is kind of the step that we're at today. And we'll go over that in a second. But for now, just to keep in mind, this is the approximate recommended minimum. It's about 120 square miles, which fits with what the Anchorage MPA is. So we're not crazy over, crazy under. And we've also prepared for you just an approximate road mileage in that area by custodian to kind of think through, okay, well, in that area, how much is owned by the borough? How many miles of roads does the state own? City of Wasilla, City of Palmer. So that's some reference. But the next steps, so again, this is the minimum. And we need to keep in mind that the purpose of an MPA is to let local government manage funds for roads which are important to the denser population. And there are areas which are beyond those dense neighborhoods, which are still very important to our urbanized population. In the sense of, for instance, GPRA is the most popular trailhead in the entire borough. I think something like 30,000 visitors per year or something like that, 30,000 trips. But as I'm sure all of you know, you go through kind of those less dense neighborhoods to get there. It's at the end of the road. That would not fall under the minimum MPA boundary. The same way, Denali Elementary School and Reddington Middle and High School, that's kind of way at the end of Carmel Road, I believe. That kind of goes through some less dense neighborhoods, and that's not inside the MPA. So if we want to expend this $10 million per year on transportation projects which serve these areas, then it might be useful to include them in the MPA. And that's kind of the feedback that we're hoping for now. The sense of like, Palmer Hayflats, all those trailheads are outside of this urbanized boundary, but should they be in the MPA just so that we can spend money on them? And that's kind of what we're hoping for to get from the public. We've had a meeting with developers and surveyors, real estate experts on February 28th. We've had a public meeting on March 29th. We've, as Kim has mentioned, have set up this interactive map online, and today we're here before you. So the particular questions that we're trying to answer are, we're soliciting general feedback, but then specifically asking for some feedback on these areas which are identified with numbers. So this idea that, okay, there's potential that this area could spread into the buttes. We're not cheating if we exclude it, but how do people feel about including it perhaps? We're looking at areas down around the fairgrounds, north of the Hayflats. Those areas are very unlikely to need to be in the minimum boundary because they're unlikely to be urbanized by the 200 households per square mile definition. But if we want to serve those roads, if we want to serve those trailheads, it might be useful to include them. If we want to make the decisions easier for an RSA, so for instance, if an RSA overlaps that area, it could be more convenient for all of the roads that are owned by an RSA to be inside the boundary. So we're trying to make some administrative decisions at this point. Kind of moving around, the only other major one is there are some scenarios, depending on how you look at your forecast, that because of these hops and these jumps, depending on how the area is developed, you could see a scenario in the next 10 years where this boundary kind of starts hopping and jumping towards Meadow Lakes through like this little barely there patchwork of neighborhoods. So we're asking people, okay, do you want to wait for that to happen, or do you want to go ahead and include it? The benefits of this boundary are we are required to re-examine it every 10 years. So every time the census is released, they send us back to confirm whether this is still accurate. So there is feedback where if we've gotten something wrong, there is an opportunity every 10 years or even generally, sooner than that. If we identify a need to revise the boundary, we're allowed to revise the boundary. So it's not kind of, all in from day one. If we've gotten something wrong, we have the ability to go back, but we don't want to be wrong. We want to get it right. So we're here with this draft minimum MPA boundary. We are soliciting feedback on other areas which don't need to be in the minimum, but could be important to include. And we're hoping to incorporate feedback from the public, from subject matter experts, from policymakers before we send it on to Juneau. And again, this final slide is how this overlaps with RSAs. So you can kind of see, especially along the bottom, it could be convenient to include some of those outline areas, just so that, for instance, Fairview, if we included those outline areas, all of its roads would be included in this boundary, and they wouldn't have to look stuff up to figure out where funding might come from. So kind of this idea that we could conform this boundary to administrative, like existing administrative boundaries in certain cases. And this is finally just kind of a note of the lengths to which we went to try to make sure that this was right-sized. So we've put in the boundary. We've looked at like what exactly the half-mile and 1.5 mile hop and jump distances are. We've looked at parcel boundaries to try to identify those neighborhoods with 3 acres per household, more or less, to see, okay, what could be included. And this is what we've been bringing around to different groups for discussion points. So thank you very much for listening. That's kind of a brief overview of where these rules come from, why certain maps look the way they do, and the work that we've been doing to try to create something that's really robust and policymakers in Juneau can look at and give us a thumbs up on. Are there any questions?
I don't really have a question,
Yes,
just a statement. And it's more regarding as you're looking to maybe expand the areas. And I understand the transportation, the roads, the trails, there are the benefits. But one negative happens is affects young first-time home buyers.
Yes, sir.
Once it becomes urban.
Yes, sir.
And for instance, rural development has Alaska Housing will allow them to do a 20% first, at say 1 to 3%. And Alaska Housing will do an 80% second in the 4 or 5% range. Once you change that to urban, that's no longer available for that area.
Yes,
So
sir.
please, when you're thinking of trying to project, I understand there's already a designated area, but those areas you were talking about expanding for the future, please keep that in mind when you're making those decisions.
Absolutely. I guess one note is that, so point absolutely taken. There are certainly areas where I know USDA, for instance, offers grants for rural areas explicitly. This boundary would not interfere with that because until the census itself, until the 2030 census expands the urban area, that is what determines whether or not a parcel qualifies for that loan. So if we today established an MPA, that would not impact what qualifies for urban versus rural until the census confirms it 10 years from now.
Right. But they're going to rely on your projections.
No, sir. They're gonna measure it when it happens. And if our projections are wrong, then we're gonna have to go back to the drawing board. But we are certainly, we're aware that a lot of our population is rural, and we're also aware of housing costs as well. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Do you take into account the agriculture land when you talk about private land?
That's an
How do you
excellent question.
factor that in?
First round, we did not. Essentially, so as you may be aware, there are agricultural restrictions. We did take a look at large parcels which are unbuilt, and some of the ag-restricted land falls on that. So first round, we didn't back that out. That is roughly, it represented 1,800 acres out of a total of 29,000 acres in that large, unbuilt, no platting action bucket. So whether if you're trying to distribute roughly 10 to 20,000 people over 27,000 acres or 29,000, the idea was that it wouldn't make too much difference in terms of density. But we're currently going back just to confirm because the point was raised. Like, hey, did you guys look at that? So we did not. We don't anticipate it to matter, but we are checking that right now.
Yeah, there's just not a ton of agriculture land up here in the valley.
No. And
so it would be good to preserve as much as we could.
I 100% agree with that.
I have one more question too.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this plays into the roads part of it, but you're talking about the density, the more population, community water and sewer systems would help. And I don't know if that's something that you guys are thinking about at all.
It's so again, point taken. Like I said, these forecasts are kind of built on the assumption of business as usual, right? So it's built on the assumption that people are going to continue gravitating towards 1 acre single family residential and kind of spreading outward. And also we're not predicting any mechanism for increased density. And we're not predicting anything like, we use the Tesla factory or the Amazon factory in Meadow Lakes as an example. We're not predicting any unexpected new draws. We are aware of all of that stuff, and that would majorly change the picture. The reason that we haven't tried to forecast this is because this process has very few consequences for being wrong, right? Again, you're required to go back every 10 years and re-examine the boundary with every census. And there are also mechanisms where if you see something like that happening, if you see expansion of water and sewer, you can go back and revise this boundary. So the idea is that we're incentivized kind of in a way to look at what the most likely scenario is. And the federal government kind of allows us through this process to react to any major new developments as they happen. So rather than trying to predict, okay, what would it look like if this happens, kind of for anything like water and sewer, which would really change this picture, for anything like Port Mackenzie major industrial development, or for Knickarn Bridge, or for you name any of these projects, if we see that it is likely to happen, that will absolutely trigger re-examining this boundary. But until we see it happening, by virtue of the fact that we're allowed to revise this boundary when we want, we thought that it would be kind of a better use of time and resources to wait to actually see, okay, cement is being poured, ribbons are being cut before we try to include this in the current boundary. But absolutely, water and sewer would 100% change this, and these forecasts are not based on that assumption. Sure.
One more question.
Absolutely.
On that, and then I'll leave you alone.
No, that's great.
Under this program, could you encourage the water and sewer development with these roadways?
I don't actually know.
I guess, to help.
This
with
might
the
be a good
development
place
in the
to
urban
switch
areas.
off,
I don't
but-
know if that works or not. but-
Yeah, Kim Solian, Planning Services Manager. I don't know if Alex, if you want to add to any of that question. So one of the things, I'll take some of it, and then if you want to add to it. The borough has been talking with the cities of Palmer and Wasilla about expanding their water and sewer services, and I think there are some current cost estimates happening right now. One of the things we're thinking about in planning is that, we have, our community wants high quality services. We want low density. We want low taxes. It's hard that happy medium is hard to find. But if we were to increase water and sewer, all of a sudden we could increase probably commercial development because they need water and sewer to build these, larger facilities. We could increase housing density because we wouldn't need to have the individual well and septic. And so we could, increase, where people are living in a smaller space. So we are thinking about it and talking about it in terms of the planning perspective, but we would need, policymakers to decide that they want us to do some more hardline cost estimating and figuring out how could the borough contribute to supporting these public utilities that would have a benefit for commercial development and housing density. But in terms of the MPO and planning for our transportation infrastructure, we're not tapping into that. The other project that we're working on, the sub-area solutions studies, the SAS project that we're working on, we are doing some planning level cost estimates related to extending water and sewer from the Palmer side down Palmer-Wasilla Highway to Trunk Road, and to start doing some scenario planning about, would this be possible? What are the cost estimates? What would the benefits be if we did that? But that's a different project. And once I have a little bit more to report on, I'm happy to come back and talk to you about that project and some of the information we're pulling together for that. I don't know if you want to add to that. One other thing I'll share, our public comment interactive map on the MPO website is open until April 28th. So if you do want to go look at the map, you want to read other people's comments, you also want to provide your comments and give us some information about where we might want to tweak the boundary and reasons why, you're fully welcome to comment on that. So we'll take all the comments we heard from the special developer meeting, the public meeting we had last month, and all the comments that we got on the interactive maps. We'll create a table, we'll analyze all those, we'll make some adjustments, and then reproduce a new draft boundary. But would like to encourage you to go check that out. It's www.mvpmpo.com.
That $10 million for MPO funding could not be spent on water and sewer. That's strictly for transportation.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Garrett? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, that moves us right along to land use classifications. I don't see any. And that brings us to audience participation, 3 minutes per person for items not scheduled for public hearing. At this time, members of the audience may speak regarding any topic that is not on the agenda for public hearing. Again, 3 minutes per person for any topic not scheduled for public hearing tonight. 5 minutes for community council representatives. And when you do speak, if you could please state your full name and spell your last name for the record. Do we have anybody signed up?
Not under audience
N-
participation.
Okay, not in the audience. Do we have anybody online, Caleb? Okay. Then I think without any objection, I'll close audience participation. It's closed. Public hearing, quasi judicial matters. Resolution 23-11, a resolution of the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Planning Commission amending Matsu Borough 17.30 conditional use permit for earth materials extraction activities by creating a registration process for earth material extraction of 2,001 to 10,000 cubic yards annually. And staff is Alex Strong.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alex Strawn, Planning Director for the Matsu Borough. The borough originally adopted gravel regulations back in 2005. I know I've given this talk a couple times before. I think the original legislation had some very ridiculously low threshold for when a gravel extraction permit would be required. I think it was 750 cubic feet. They very quickly realized that it needed to go up. And so there's some legislation to bring the minimum requirement at which a gravel permit would be required to 2,000 cubic yards. And it's been there for quite some time. There was legislation a few months back that would bring the threshold at which a permit would be required to 20,000 cubic yards. That failed at the assembly with the Planning Commission recommending that they fail that. And then just back in February, as you probably recall, there is this Planning Commission reviewed another piece of legislation that would raise the threshold at which a gravel permit would be required from 2,000 cubic yards to 10,000 cubic yards. This board recommended approval of that, and then it went to the assembly. When it got to the assembly, there was quite a bit of controversy. And some assembly members started making amendments to the legislation. I think there was 4 different assembly members that had various amendments to the legislation, and it was a bit of a mess. People didn't really know what they were voting on. The members of the audience or public didn't really know what they were commenting on. So the assembly member 2, who is the originator of the ordinance, made a motion to postpone it indefinitely and directed staff to come back with a clean ordinance that sort of incorporated all of the amendments that the assembly members were going after. And so that's what this ordinance does. It creates a registration process for gravel pits that would be from 2,000 to 10,000 cubic yards. So under 2,000 cubic yards, no permit required. If you're over 2,000 cubic yards, but under 10,000 cubic yards, you have a couple of options, one of which would be under this legislation to register your gravel pit. And it would be a simple form that you come into the Matsu Borough Plan or the planning department to apply for it. You'd be allowed 1 registration per year for a total of 5 years. And so each individual entity, whether it be a person or a corporation, would only be allowed 1 registration. And registrations would only be allowed, they'd have to be spaced out a half mile from any other gravel pit that's doing a registration as well. There's some standards that were put into this ordinance. There's some hours of operation that are required. It allows, there's some dust control requirements. So if you're tracking mud out on the road, you have to get out and sweep it up. There's But essentially, it's what we would call ministerial. So there's no discretion in the standards. If the standards are met, then it's approved, and operators can operate up to 10,000 cubic yards. Of course, there's also the option to get a conditional use permit. There's also the option to get an administrative permit. And in case you don't know, the threshold for getting an administrative permit is you can harvest any amount of gravel within a 2-year period, or you can harvest up to 7,000 cubic yards indefinitely. And that is a quicker and easier process that is adjudicated by yours truly, the planning director. In those administrative permits, I do sit at this dais. We do advertise that there's going to be a meeting. I gavel in, we hold a public hearing, get public testimony, and make a decision on that. So that's sort of where we're at with this ordinance, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Does any of the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Strong? At this time, then, we'll open public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Will, go ahead.
I was just saying it's that was rather difficult to follow, even as it is, and I understand there's been several different iterations of amendments and various proposals, but it sounded like a very convoluted and complicated and time intensive process. So if I'm understanding correctly, that's the process that someone would have to go through if they did want to move more than 10,000 cubic yards of gravel. Is that correct?
So if somebody, under this ordinance, if somebody wanted to remove more than 10,000 cubic yards, they would have to either get an administrative permit or a conditional use permit. If they wanted to harvest over 2,000 but under 10,000, they could do this registration process with all these various standards.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, at this time, I'd like to open public hearing on Resolution 23-11. Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record. And we do have 3 signups in the audience. We'll start there. DJ McBride.
Hi, I'm back again. I'm DJ McBride, msb.planning.commission, and I am the RSA 15 Caswell Lakes Board Chairperson. The RSA 15 Board is against this ordinance amending MSB 1730. And to that end, you have Resolution 04-23 from RSA 15 Board stating their stance against this ordinance and the reasons why. The current permitting process establishes standards addressing sufficient setbacks, lot area, buffers, noise mitigation, dust air quality, road maintenance, and other safeguards for the residents of this borough. These standards can currently be enforced by the permitting process and follow-up inspection. This registration process eliminates the public notification and comment process. Thus, the RSA boards in the area have no notice or even the ability to comment on the impacts of earth material extraction sites on the roads in their RSAs. One standard dump truck can haul about 10 cubic yards of material. Then extracting 10,000 cubic yards from one parcel would generate about 1,000 truck trips per year per each registered site. In addition, having the registrations limited to one person, that's great, but for 5 years, that means that's 5,000 dump truck trips for the life of that site. Having the sites separated by half a mile means that there could be several extraction sites all utilizing the same roads to truck materials out. There are many rural roads that serve as collectors for many and miles of residential roads, and multiple extraction sites could use these same collectors, running thousands of truckloads on just one of these roads. And this would adversely impact our already marginal and substandard gravel roads. The rural RSAs would have to pay the cost for the road repairs after thousands of dump truck loads of material per year per registration are trucked over their mostly gravel roads. Having one person hold the registration per year sounds great. How many of these are going to be issued per area? How many of these are going to get issued in RSA 15? 1? 100? 250? It's a big RSA, lots of roads. So, in other words, the current permitting requirements are working well. Without them, the rural areas of the borough could turn into the wild, wild west of uncontrolled and unsupervised earth materials extraction. If it ain't broke, why fix it? Thank you.
Next, we have Patty Fisher.
Hello, my name is Patty Fisher, and I'm here in opposition to the gravel ordinance. It seems that this issue is never ending. I guess it's going to go on as long as we have gravel in the borough, and that will be for a long time. As you all are well aware, and Alex pointed out, it's actually been just a little over a year since that ordinance was defeated by the Assembly. And then we had another one come up this spring, and now so we're on the third one. Each time the public, and I'm going to call them voters, has spoken out loudly in opposition to Mr. Tu's attempt to increase the amount of gravel extracted without a permit. I trust that you will remember all of the voices of people that have come to this room and spoken out in opposition to this legislation. The issue is not really about gravel. It's about public process. The legislation cuts neighborhoods out of the process of deciding what is good and appropriate for them. That is the most important failing of this legislation. No public process. The new ordinance calls this change a small gravel registration. A bit deceiving, don't you think? Since the ordinance increases the level of gravel mined without a permit by 5 times. It can't be too small a thing if it affects water, air, traffic, and safety by 5 times. There are a few specific problems which I've noted with the ordinance. It says that extraction shall not create a big hole or depression in a manner that limits future development. What about those extraction sites that have been operating legally at 2,000 or less cubic yards and have already created a big hole or depression? Are they required to fill that hole? There's no language in the ordinance on that subject. The new ordinance says that the extraction shall not occur within 100 feet of any water body, wetlands, or within 4 feet of the seasonal high water table. What about water wells, drinking water? Shouldn't that be specifically protected also? Lastly, this legislation limits one pit to 1/2 mile distance. Ms. McBride and I came up on the same issue here. Do you realize how many roads in Mat-Su are one way in and one way out and are longer than 1/2 mile? I quit trying to make a list of them. On a 2-mile winding dirt road, there could be 4 extraction sites with the 4 times the number of trucks going by the homes because it's one way in and one way out. So, and it should be pointed out that the 1/2 mile restriction really is not necessarily beneficial because there are areas where gravel could easily be extracted. Oops. And if there were a public process, the public, and there were no homes, and the public would not be objecting to it. This is the current process is working well. I urge you to reject this change. Thank you.
Thank you. And forgive me, I'm having trouble reading the first name, but is it Sean McBride?
Hello, my name is Sean McBride. That's McBride. I'm a resident of the Caswell Lakes area, and I'm here to speak in opposition to amending MSB 1730, the conditional use permit for earth materials extraction. I feel that the current system is working just fine. Currently, property owners can move materials around their property for building or development as needed, and up to 2,000 cubic yards can be extracted and removed. Currently, removing over 2,000 cubic yards requires a permit. These permits set standards that protect water quality, air quality, noise limits, road usage, and other factors for borough residents. With a permit, these standards can be established, inspected, and enforced. The proposed change has the potential to be abused and could harm many borough residents, while it appears to potentially benefit very few people or businesses. I feel this is a poorly thought out, ill-conceived solution desperately in search of a problem that doesn't really exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that hasn't signed in? Could you please sign, there's a sign-in sheet there at the microphone, if you could sign in. And again, your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Good evening. My name's Mark Catini. I am a civil engineer, also landowner with a gravel pit and an operator. I've shared that background with you in the past. I have 5 items to go over with you tonight. Item 1, this written small registration process is not small business, it's medium-sized business. My calculations are based on my history of selling materials and trucking materials. In 5 years, it's a $1.3 million to a it's a $1 million to a $1.3 million, depending if you allow the screening plants. The second item, and if you want the specifics on how I calculated that from gravel materials and truck hauling, I'll be glad to answer that. This, as written, does not promote fair regulation amongst business owners, especially us gravel pit owners and operators. When you have a half-mile spacing between these new pits, what about the spacing between us existing pits? So I don't feel it's fair to have that distinction made. Either take it out or put it in. All those existing pits should have the same protective buffer around them to other pits. Number 3 is adjacent property owners need to be protected, and with visual screening. And when I read the regs and I have applications from the borough, when I come in with my clients, one of the things we do is the borough requires us to have visual screening, and that can be berms and vegetative buffers. I would recommend that if you're going to do no screening plants, at least require a 10-foot buffer. In the industry, we use the stumps that are cleared off it. We stack it up on the perimeter. It protects the neighbors and it protects the operators. We don't want these exempted permits to give our industry a bad eye. And if you can't see them mining and you can't hear them, they're good neighbors. And I think that needs to be written in there. Also, the small gravel registration process should not trump a comprehensive plan. Many residents in this borough and their communities have comp plans that preclude gravel pits in there. I can't go in with a client and get a gravel pit. And for this borough to allow exemptions in comp plans that don't allow it, I think it's a missight. I have to agree that this package is a great improvement than what was at the assembly, and I want to thank staff for that. Also, number 4 is when we submit, this is an application when I come in to submit for clients, and also grandfather rights had to do it. On the page 3, it says, submit documentation showing compliance with borough, state, and federal requirements. I would ask that you have anyone coming in for a screening plant to submit an MSHA ID number for that plant. and you will promote safety. And that's what's at the back of this packet. 4 places I read, you guys are going to promote safety. Those screening plants are dangerous. They maim and they kill people. As a professional civil engineer, tonight I have done my job to advise you of that. My conscience will be cleared should someone get hurt on these exempted sites that have screening plants. I'm transferring that responsibility to the Mat-Su Borough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that didn't sign up?
Excuse me.
I was asking, was there anybody else? If you can sign in there and then state your full name and spell your last name.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this working? I can't hear it from here. And Planning Commission members. There's 2 items I'd like to touch on.
Could you state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
I'm sorry, I jumped the gun here. My name is Jim Stocker. The last name is spelled Stocker. Thank you. The first thing I'd like to touch on is very quickly, it's a legal issue that I've been concerned about here for a while. I would encourage and ask this Planning Commission to check and confer with the borough attorney. I've had this issue raised, I've heard it raised at the assembly meetings. There seems to be, and there appears to be, in my opinion, a very serious conflict of interest with the person, the assembly person that brought this ordinance forward. And that's the first thing I'd like to touch on. The second thing is I just wanted to explain where I live. When I built my home 35 years ago, there was 2 homes on my property or in the area, and now there's 40. On a 1-mile stretch of gravel, we have 40 homes. And right next to me, adjoining to my property, is a neighbor who has and just moved in with a lot of heavy equipment, belly dumps, backhoes, things in that nature. And they're all great. Don't get me wrong. I use them and enjoy them myself. And gravel is great too. The valley has a lot of good gravel. But my neighbor on the other side of me has 110 acres of gravel. So what if my neighbor decides that the other neighbor is going to haul 1,000 trips of gravel out past my house and 40 other homes on a gravel road that's not, it's on the bottom of the RSA list, and it has no upgrades in the process until 2023. We're on the bottom of the list. We've been on the bottom of the list forever. So one of my concerns is how and what protections are in these amendments that would protect an issue like this? What would protect places that have subdivisions or heavy residential areas with dust, with noise, and with a lot of loads of gravel or a lot of truckloads and a lot of traffic? And that's one of my concerns. So those are basically my 2 concerns. And I apologize. I came tonight. I was not prepared. I didn't even plan on testifying. It was a last minute thing, and I probably didn't do an outstanding job, but that's all I really have to say. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience? And if you could sign in, and when you speak, state your full name and spell your last name.
Hi, my name is Lucy Klebesaddles, Klebesadel, and I live in the RSA District 26. My question for you is, when will you require revegetation or reclamation of the property that has now been made a desolate wasteland when they are done extracting their gravel, since they are not required like the major commercial pits to do? They don't have what our gentleman engineer just told you about in a permitting process. when people go and extract gravel, they leave a dip, a hole, and it's usually not conducive to the nearby neighbors and the residents. It then becomes a nuisance and attraction for four-wheelers and kids on bikes. Then you're asking for injuries. And it also devalues the nearby property owners' homes because it is a gravel pit that is not attractive for the homeowners and devalues their property. How are you going to compensate them for that? And I don't know if that has been addressed in this, but I think that's something you guys all should be concerned about because we have too many old pits that are just still look like crap or garbage pits. People go in there and shoot up with their guns and then party in there and leave broken bottles all over, and the homeowners suffer for it. So thank you. That's what I had to say.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience that hasn't spoken would like to speak on the resolution? Okay. Okay, we have people online. If you are on the phone and would like to speak to this resolution, press *3. Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Edwards again from the Road Board. I hope you still have our resolution from the Road Board in front of you on this, and the position still stays the same. I do want to thank staff for working.
Steve, could you spell your last name for us?
Yes, Edwards. Edwards. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, you got it?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So our resolution stands. We're still opposed to this. I do want to thank staff for putting some work into it. It's much better than it was, especially the part where the borough staff can enter the property and inspect it for violations. I really like that. But we still have and they added the track out onto the paved roads. I really like that. We still have the concern with the substandard roads. As you know, we have so many substandard roads in this borough that are maintained, and you run that many trucks across them, and they will fall apart, especially this time of year or even a little bit later. When there's weight restrictions, obviously there's problems with the road bed, and that's when we're going to have these roads fall apart. And then RSA funds will be expended to fix those. So that objection still stands. We need to do something about limiting that traffic on these substandard roads. I also wanted to speak to the main driver of this seemed to be the difficulty of getting these conditional permits, administrative permits that Alex mentioned. And I felt so strongly about this that I went to the trouble to apply for one myself for a gravel pit on my property, and I filled out the entire application, every line item on the application, one by one. I wrote a narrative for it. I printed off photos and documents for each item, drew drawings, and all of that. I worked steady at it, but it took me 2 hours and 15 minutes. And then I submitted that application. And that part of it, the initial phase was done. And then later on, in a week or so, I got a response back where there was some additional clarification needed on a few of the items. And I have not completed those yet, but I feel like it would take me about 3 to maybe 5 hours to complete the rest of those clarifications and drawings. And in the worst case scenario, maybe a few $100 in expense. And so and I don't know if it would be approved, but those were the items that were addressed, and I feel like I could respond to those. So it's not nearly as onerous of a process as been described, at least for my circumstance, which did not involve wetlands. And so I feel like we're still working on a problem that doesn't exist. We can just keep the process in place now, and we don't need this new registration that doesn't involve the public. I think public is important, and I hope you do too. So just to keep the public process in mind in this, and ask you to maybe reject this for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, next person on the line, please press *3 and state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Dewey Bittler, Bitler, and this is about the new gravel ordinance. There's no enforcement. There's still no enforcement. The borough can go on the property and inspect it, but there's no enforcement in there. And then there's no way to pull the permit. In the regulation, they can apply for the permit and they automatically get it, but there's no way for them to pull it once they get inspected it and find that there's something wrong. And the big thing is there's no public comment. You're taking the public's rights away when you don't let them have a comment on something that's affecting their neighborhood. And then I like your dust cleanup on the paved road. That's fine, but what about when there's a gravel pit on a gravel road that's being degraded? There's nothing in the ordinance about, maintaining the roads that you're tearing up. And then, as much trouble as this is causing, there should be a tax put on the gravel because of the burden to the community, and that'll help us out with our property tax. And I'd like to tell you a little story about the fine folks of North Big Lake back in 2009. Now, this nice couple by the name of Bill and Helen Harriet owned 40 acres and wanted to turn it into a gravel extraction site. They wanted 1,000 gravel trucks to exit the property per year for 14 years. The conditional use permit was opposed by the majority of the community, the Big Lake Community Council, Borough Planner, and the Big Lake Road Service Area Board of Supervisors. It was right in the middle of a residential and recreational area. The Harriets went through the application and said they would do the 2,000 cubic yards per year. That's a little debatable, but anyway, at that same time, a conditional use permit was granted for a 25,000 cubic yard extraction site, with the commission requiring 3 conditions in the resolution. The difference is the area and who it would impact. Now, this is called a public process. The public had input, and it was best for the community. The Assembly wants to throw out some amendments like breadcrumbs to make it look like they're trying to make this work. But when it comes down to it, some of the Assembly just wants to get rid of the public comment. The public comment shut down the Harriets. If you change that and go to the 10,000 cubic yards, the Harriets can go and run 1,000 trucks a year, and the neighbors couldn't say anything about it. That's taking their rights away. And what you do on your property is one thing, but when you affect your neighbor, that's another. With increased traffic, noise pollution, decreased property values, and the harm to the watershed and wildlife, you have to preserve the value and spirit, character, and integrity of the surrounding area. Now, a lot of people came down here and testified. You heard from, a lot of educated people. Do not change the gravel permit
Can you wrap up
process.
your comments, please?
Yeah, just saying, just don't change the gravel process. If anything, enforce it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Through the chair.
online. Yes.
May I request a brief recess?
Yes, we'll take 5 minutes. We're taking a 5-minute break for those online that still wish to speak. So, just some of that stuff. There's a spot on there. There's still some that's not in
I call you Tesla.
Oh, I'm sorry. Alex, we still need Alex. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, let's get us on record. Let me know. Hey, guys, we're ready to go back. Okay. We're back on record. So we were phone, anybody on the phone? We're going to continue next.
Hello, my name is Ruth Wood. That's Wood. I live in Talkeetna, and I sent you guys some comments that I hope you got because it says how incensed I am that we are looking at this ordinance for the third time. It is really not fair to make us comment and comment and comment. I disagree with Mr. Strawn. We did know what we were commenting on when it came before the assembly. We knew what we were going to comment on the night they withdrew it. The proposed amendments, two proposed amendments have been worked into this. The best one has not. That one would have addressed the fact that this ordinance provides for no public notice, no public comment. If somebody's going to put a gravel pit in next to me, I think I should have adequate notice, and I think I should be able to comment. And this ordinance takes that away from me. It basically tries to shut me up, and I don't like that. Registration is not a conditional use permit. Registration is something they just made up. So they are going to eliminate the conditional use permit for this 2,000 to 10,000 cubic yards and replace it with this meaningless registration that, as others have pointed out, cannot be enforced, or at least they have no plans to enforce it, and it cuts the public out. I just cannot believe that good government would keep, when the public stands up and says, we don't like this, they don't even go back and have work sessions and public meetings and try to get public work sessions and try to get, what's the problem? Nobody has told us what the problem is. There is no problem. The borough is the fastest growing place in the state of Alaska. If the CUP was that big of a problem, we would not be the fastest growing place. I think it's ironic that you start your meeting tonight with the planning department making a presentation of actual planning, of actual ways they're going to try to get some money to make the borough a better place to live in. But how are you going to make the borough better? How are you going to make good subdivisions when you can have a gravel pit right in the middle of it, right next to your own house, on either side of your own house? This legislation is not well thought out. It is not in the public interest. And it is really an insult to the people of the borough that it keeps coming back until, I guess you're hoping to wear us out. I don't know. But it's a really, really bad idea. And I hope you will vote PC11 down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next online.
Hello, my name is Gretchen Keim. Last name is Keim. I am in opposition of this ordinance mainly for a lot of the same reasons my fellow borough residents have stated. I don't feel that there's a problem with the current process. It seems to be working fine, so I see no reasons to change it. The lack of public comment on this, on future gravel pits is very disturbing. I've lived in the borough for 20 years, and I appreciate the ability to be less governed than other areas of the state, but this is pushing things way too far. It seems like it would benefit very few people and put a lot of us out. You know, it's just very disheartening to see that we wouldn't have any public comment of things like this were going, if a gravel pit was proposed in our areas. I am concerned about what the additional roads, what the condition of roads would be, what it would be doing to the environment, as other people have mentioned, to water, to drinking water, to wetlands. There's a whole bunch of things. I just do not feel that this is a very good idea at all. And it sounds like this is something that is being pushed through primarily by one person, and that's very disheartening to me. So I'm strongly against this, and I hope you will vote it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Next online.
Hi, this is Camden Yeatley, spelled Yehle. I'm speaking today as the president of the Meadow Lakes Community Council, and as other people have stated, we are tired of commenting on this same issue, and we're going to continue to comment on it for as long as it takes. But I wanted to remind the Planning Commission that the Meadow Lakes Community Council membership voted at our March 8th, 2023 meeting to oppose this proposed gravel ordinance. The amendments don't address our concerns. We had about 25 people in attendance at that meeting. We support maintaining the current limit of 2,000 cubic yards to require a permit, as well as the existing conditional use permitting process. We appreciate the existing public process. It's worked for us in Meadow Lakes on both sides of the coin, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Next person.
Good evening. My name is John Korda. That's spelled Korta, and I'm the chair of the Talkeetna Community Council. I'm testifying on behalf of the council regarding this proposed amendment. It was discussed at our April Community Council meeting and several previous meetings, and there's unanimous opposition to the proposed resolution because the proposed amendments don't address our previous concerns, mostly regarding the lack of public process. We continue to oppose changing the threshold for a CUP or administrative permit for earth materials extractions for a number of reasons. First, the current level of 2,000 cubic yards is not going to be a problem. It's reasonable regulation that benefits residents and developers. Secondly, there's no evidence that raising the level to 10,000 cubic yards would have the effect of lowering the price of gravel for the end consumer. Nor have there been significant complaints from within the industry that the regulatory process that currently exists is cumbersome. Finally, our community's economy is largely dependent on tourism, and any changes to the status quo could have serious negative impacts to the people and businesses who work in that industry. The CUP is an important process that protects both community members and contractors. It allows for a process to take place where a contractor can present a plan for extraction to the public, and various stakeholders can weigh in with their concerns about potential impacts. Parties can then get together to discuss ways to mitigate any negative impacts, which results in a more predictive and positive outcome for everyone involved. The CUP also protects the environment and ensures that certain minimum environmental standards are followed and adhered to. Lowering the standard would have the effect of drastically increasing conflicts in neighborhoods and communities where extraction would be taking place, as well as having potential negative impact to the environment. The Talkeetna Community Council strongly urges the Planning Commission to reject this resolution, leave the current exemption limit of 2,000 cubic yards in place, and protect the process for the public to provide input on extraction operations that impact their communities. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next online.
Yes, my name is Sandra Phillips Johnson, PHILLIPS JOHNSON. And I want to reiterate, support the comments that have been made before me. Against this amendment. I've been there for the last several meetings of when we had it of the proposed on Sylvan, and I'm concerned about my property value and the welfare of the people that travel up and down the roads and the breakdown of the roads. I just think this is a bad amendment, and that we don't need to, like it's been said before, don't need to fix something that's not broke. So please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Next online or on the phone? Nobody? One more time for the audience. Is there anybody else that hasn't spoken on this? Okay, seeing, hearing no other. One more. Online? Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yep.
Want to make sure I can hear him. Okay. Hello, my name is Shakina Khan, and I'm calling in support of the gravel ordinance. I'm absolutely baffled by all the negative things, and just because there's a lot of people calling in and supporting.
Could I interrupt you for a second? Could you state your name again and spell your last name for the record?
Shakina Kang, last name Khaang, first name Shakena.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm calling in support of gravel ordinance. Let me take a deep breath. The current 2,000 cubic yards is a complete joke. I mean, it took me 2 years to take only 8 inches of my property. That's like 4 inches a year. Okay, like 2,000 is a complete joke. Year after year, I remove only like few inches, and those hills look exactly the same. You know, I got 14-foot hills around my property. Okay, earlier somebody said about the children, you know, safety, or the thing is, the kids come on my property, slide down. You know, they're actually endangering their life and sliding onto the road. So, 10,000 cubic yards will allow me to like remove 20 inches off my property and help my neighbor. I got a neighbor, Jason, down the road. He's sitting on a darn flood zone. He's always like begging me when I can, you know, sell him some gravel. I've been trying to develop like my 5 acres, and it seems like eternity. I don't have many years left myself. You know, I want to pass down something to my children. And at the moment, all I can only pass down to them is undeveloped property and like a Pontiac aspect that is like falling apart. You know, I'm sorry. I'm just, you know, I'm getting older and more frustrated, and every year, because how long it's taking me to take this land, you know, to get this work done. I want to briefly point out some, you know, benefits here about this. If we make this ordinance to increase it to 10, you know, from what currently it's 2,000. So road building will be more affordable because the road construction company can buy a hill of gravel from like a nearby neighbor and like take the gravel and leave a nice flat buildable lot for the owner. And case in point, the further the gravel pit is, the more damage to the road, because you have to like haul all that dirt across the town, and not very, very efficient. And builders and companies will spend less money on trucking and have to have less road wear. You know, people talk about low road wear all the lot. Well, that's the point. It will actually save the road wear from, you know, the road going bad. And it will improve the unusable lot and will make it very usable. And I think it's a win-win situation. And last point I want to point out, that submitting paperwork, people say, oh, it's It's no problem. You know, earlier somebody pointed out it takes hours and hours. You say it's easy. It's not. Those that say that it's easy, they never really tried. You know, it's hours upon hours. And the last point, not because, but I want to point out, just because more people are calling in, or you know, and saying that they're, oh yeah, we're against this, you know, ordinance, doesn't mean you speak for a majority. There's a lot of people who want that change, and just because they're not everybody technologically savvy. Last time I was at the assembly meeting, I was trying to call, and I was on hold for such a long time I could never get through. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have one more. You're up.
Yes. Thank you. Diane Lada, LADA, resident of Big Lake. Thank you for a minute to speak. Resolution 2311 once again brings out the worst in our community. If anything, the worst on our planning and the overreach of a few. Poor land. There is no real planning in Resolution 2311. There is no proper land engineering, research, no water table studies, no natural vegetation protection, no process slope safety, no soil contamination margins, once again, ambiguity. Even Mr. Strawn alluded to various standards, variables. Although there are pit processes that operate lawfully today, to push this resolution only attempts to adapt more unfettered codes and egregiously expanding pits is anything but, it's really vexatious. Vexatious planning at best. That's what we see. That's what the public sees. To refer to this resolution as problem solved for natural resources is insulting to the pits in compliance and to this planning commission. Does this sound like it was tabled indefinitely? Pretty much no. The voters are speaking. Registration process, you say. You mentioned that today, and you mentioned more variables represented here in this entity. No clear specifics. Registration for what? Is it registration for in wording alone, which is what many landowners feel right now. The process remains faulty, and it does remain messy, as Mr. Strong mentioned. You use words like confusing process and controversy. Those still remain as well. Nothing really brought clarity. It only does highlight the ambiguity. There's no two gravel pits, if you think about it, that are the same due to the topographical features and how they're situated on the land. I don't think this resolution sounds like planning. I don't think it looks to manage responsibly. With the removal of the regulations and the permitting and the public process, it appears to be backwards, a breach, derelict, and irresponsible. I pray the legislation this legislation would take a closer look at the aggregate industry in the middle of our homes and neighbors. It's a misuse of power, and it only leaves a legacy of misuse. You've lost our trust, and that's unfortunate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else online? Okay, seeing and hearing there are no other persons to be heard. Is there any objection to closing public hearing? Public hearing is closed. Mr. Strong, do you have any response to comments made during the public hearing?
No, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. The chair will now entertain a motion for resolution 23-11. Commissioner Cohn?
Yeah, Commissioner Cohn, I would like to move that we take resolution 23-11 and take some more time with it and delay it until next meeting. I personally would like to do some more work on it. The public comments have been very clear, and I don't know that we have addressed the comments in a manner that goes over the public comments as well as we could. And I would like to take a chance to do that before the next meeting and try to make some changes and bring it back with some amendments. So I move that we take resolution 2311 and move it to the next meeting.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, and Commissioner Glenn seconded. Is there any discussion? Commissioner Fernandez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually hoping for clarity, and it may come from some of the other members of the commission, the chair, or from staff. I've heard a lot of comments inside and outside of the assembly chambers about this particular ordinance. And though I understand at some in what seems like scattered and individual level, this may benefit certain people with their own agendas for their property and stuff like that. But I'm still trying to figure out, can anyone share with me, why is this ordinance being proposed? Was there something that's broken in our system? Is there some barrier that the borough has created that is just becoming too overwhelming for the community to bear any longer? Can anyone share that with me?
Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I guess I want to address a procedural matter right now.
Okay.
If we're going to discuss and deliberate on this particular resolution, there should be a motion to approve. That would be the primary motion, and then there'd be a motion to postpone till time certain.
Okay, so
After
let's backtrack. And I'll entertain a motion for 23-11.
So we have a motion on the floor right now. Yeah. So
No, through the chair. I apologize. Mr. Strawn is trying to say that I misspoke out of turn. It's not the right moment to be asking a question about the overall motion that doesn't exist, right?
Okay.
We have Ms. Cohn's motion. I do apologize for overstepping. Thank you.
So we do have a motion on the floor to postpone 23-11. Okay, is there any discussion on postponing 23-11? Hearing none.
Sorry. So, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Allen?
Thank you. This is Commissioner Allen. I feel like that we have discussed this so much over the course of the last little over a year. And I think the core thing about the change, the expansion, from 2 to 10, is really the heart of the objection in the community. And I guess I'll just say I'm very dubious that there's anything we can do to dress this up that is going to be acceptable to the majority of the people in the community. And, I guess that's my concern. And I just think I would rather see it, let's put this thing to bed one way or the other. And I'd rather see us do an up and down vote. I mean, folks have all showed up to testify for the umpteenth time. And if we put it off again, they're going to be asked to come and testify again. And I just feel like it's time to do an up or down vote on it.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on postponing 23-11 till the next Planning Commission meeting?
Through the chair.
Yes.
Commissioner Fernandez, I'm in alignment with the statements that were just made. I believe that it would be in the community's best interest if we voted on this today. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Cohen?
Through the chair, I believe that there have been some very good points made and things that we could address. And I would at least like to have something that goes back to the assembly rather than just a no vote. So it is my desire that we take this and massage this and work together to do something different. And maybe we can, maybe I can bring some of the amendments back that would allow some discussion on the floor, and that maybe some things can be changed. Maybe it can't. There has been so much discussion with this. I would like to see if we could find something to finalize it and not just say no and have it come back again. So in my opinion, I say we give the assembly something that they can work with, and then we go from there.
Any other commissioners? Okay, I think I'm in agreement with Commissioner Cohn. I would like to let her work on the amendments with Alex. I don't think 2 weeks is going to kill us. This thing's been dragging on long enough, and another 2 weeks, and we're not the final say anyway. So I don't think it's going to kill us. So I do hear some objection. So we will, and I understand the clickers are working. So a yes vote means that we postpone till the next Planning Commission meeting. A no means No, and we'll go back to make a motion for the,
The motion to delay does not carry. We have 3 for and 3 against.
no?
No?
No.
So the motion passes with with Planning Commissioners Rubio, Allen, and Fernandez opposed.
4-3. 4-3.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to clarify my record. I apologize. I missed one of the votes. It does pass to continue this to the next hearing with 4 in support and 3 opposed, Rubio, Allen, and Fernandez.
Okay. So we're moving down to correspondence and information. I don't see any. Is that correct, Alex? No unfinished business? No new business? Commission business? Commission business. Mr. Strong?
As always, you have this in the back of your packet. There's a little cheat sheet letting you know what's going to come your way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Director and commissioner comments. Let's start with the director.
Okay. I guess the one thing that I have is that if anybody wants to speak at the next meeting regarding that item that just got postponed, will be on unfinished business. And so people will be able to speak under audience participation on that.
Okay. Commissioner Rubio.
No comment tonight.
Commissioner Allen.
I just wanted to, even though I was, obviously I was in favor of doing an up or down vote today, I wanted to offer that I'm happy to attend any kind of a work session or contribute in any way I can. And then I guess, what I would say is I'd like to get whatever the new product is going to be out as soon as we can, so that folks, when they show up to speak, they'll have something in hand that they can meaningfully discuss, and that we will have time to digest it as a group as well, so that we can have meaningful, intelligent discussions about what we've decided. So anyway, I just want to make that offer. Thank you.
Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I want to thank the public for attending this hearing and for taking the time and energy to continuously testify. Your comments are being heard and they are being considered. I would encourage you to continue to do so. To my commission members, there are 4 questions in general that I ask myself whenever considering a piece of legislation. Why is it necessary? How does it improve the community? What or who benefits from such legislation? And who is harmed? When I ask myself these 4 questions on this particular piece of legislation, none of the answers that I can come up with seem to benefit the community that we are all here to advocate for. I appreciate all of you for being here and for taking the time, and in particular for staff for being the conduit through which legislation and the following amendments go through in order to create the content that we see before us. I understand it is a challenging job that requires you to perform regardless of alignment, however that may look in whatever terms. So I just appreciate all of the work that you put into it. And thank you, Chairman Kendig, for running a tight ship. I appreciate you.
Commissioner Scoggin.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the public process is obviously important. We had another issue last time. We were trying to eliminate the public process on the lakes issue. So that kind of concerns me, how passionate we can be on what some of our neighbors are doing but not so worried about public land that just a few people are making a decision on. And another comment I have is the substandard roads comes up a lot. And I think the weight restrictions, if people don't really understand, that are on there now to preserve the roads. They take them off when the roads are good enough to run on. And they vary throughout the borough. I do know that. So there is that. And there are roads that aren't up to standard, but we need to build roads and we need to work at getting better roads because it is responsibility to promote commerce in the valley. And the truck traffic was one of the other concerns. The truck traffic is going to come from somewhere, you know, and I get it. If you got a gravel pit, you're going to have a lot of traffic right by that, but you're still going to have that many loads coming from different directions through other neighborhoods to get to different job sites. Just keep those things in mind, you know, I guess, but that's really all I have now.
Commissioner Cohn?
Commissioner Cohn, through the chair, I would just like to also thank the public. I understand this has been a one-year process. I have been on the board since January. I'm learning the process. Unfortunately, I haven't learned it fast enough. So my choice of taking this back and working a little harder on it, I am really hopeful that we will come back with a good product and it will be beneficial to our community, that the assembly will be able to accept or deny, but they will at least have some options. As a new commission, there are several new commissioners here. I think that these will be options for us to get better at it. Please, public, do not stop sending your emails and coming to talk. We will get better at this process. I will hopefully get better at this process, and hopefully we will have a better community for it.
Commissioner Glenn?
Yeah, I appreciate the public process and definitely don't want to violate that. But, a couple of things that keep coming up, which I'll second that Commissioner Scoggins brought up, is the amount of dump trucks on our roads. And this gravel is going to get moved. It's coming from somewhere. So whether we bring it 30 miles down the road or we bring it 2 miles down the road, it's coming. And people are building houses and they're building businesses. And I think we do need to upgrade all the roads. A good portion of the roads in the borough are substandard, the side roads, and those need to be brought up to par. And we need some good mine reclamation plans for certain. And anyway, I appreciate everybody on this board, and thank you.
Well, I guess that leaves me, and I would like to see Commissioner Cohn, your work done in an expedited manner, and I would like to, I don't know if we can get it up on the website so the public can see it before the meeting. I would love to see that. I would love to see crystal clear whereases and crystal clear now, therefore be it resolved. So, and nobody has any doubts about any of the amendments. So, but that's it for me. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned.